Before starting the story, please like and subscribe the channel. I am just an old lad that is trying hard to get by. This story is one of my favorites because the ending will leave you somewhat in peace. I've been a detective for over a decade, but the disappearance of the 6 hikers on the Appalachian Trail was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It all began with a frantic call from a park ranger, reporting that a group of hikers was 3 days overdue. The families were desperate for answers, their voices full of fear and worry. It was my job to find out what had happened. So I arrived at the ranger station early in the morning, the fog still hanging thick in the air. Ranger Pete, a seasoned veteran of these woods, was waiting for me. His weathered face was etched with concern. "They were supposed to check in every evening," Pete said, shaking his head. "Last I heard from them was 4 days ago. They were heading into a remote section of the trail, one that's not well marked." Pulling out my notebook. "Do you have a map of the area they were hiking through?" Pete handed me a detailed map, marked with the trail the hikers had planned to take. "It's rough terrain," he said. "Not many people go that way. Too easy to get lost if you're not careful." As I studied the map, I noted the various landmarks and potential hazards. The trail wound through dense forests, up steep inclines and across rocky outcrops. It was beautiful but unforgiving territory. "We'll start by retracing their steps," I said. "I need a list of the hikers and any contact information for their families." Pete handed me a folder with all the necessary information. The hikers were a group of friends: Sarah, Tom, Emily, Jake, Rachel, and Ben. They'd been hiking together for years, always seeking out new challenges. This time, it seemed, they might have bitten off more than they could chew. I radioed back to the station, organizing a search team. Within a couple of hours, we were ready to head out. The team consisted of experienced search and rescue personnel, all equipped with the latest gear. We knew time was of the essence. As we moved deeper into the woods, the sense of urgency grew. We found their first campsite easily enough. There were signs of a campfire and the remains of a meal. Everything seemed normal, but as we pushed further along the trail, things began to feel off. The forest grew denser. It was easy to see how someone could lose their way out here. We found their second campsite late in the afternoon. This one was different. There were signs of a struggle, tent pegs pulled from the ground, gear scattered, and a chilling silence that hung over the clearing. And I crouched down, examining the disturbed earth. "Something happened here," I muttered to myself. But what? The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. We set up our own camp, planning to continue the search at first light. That night, as I lay in my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The woods were alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, but there was something else, something that set my nerves on edge. At dawn, we resumed our search. As we moved further into the wilderness, we found more signs: broken branches, scraps of fabric caught on thorns, and footprints leading off the trail. It was clear they had been trying to find their way back, but had ended up even more lost. Then we found the first body. It was Tom. His lifeless form was lying at the bottom of a rocky incline, his body twisted in a way that no living person could survive. The scene was gruesome, and it was clear he had fallen. But there was something else. His expression was one of sheer terror, frozen in a silent scream. We radioed in the discovery and waited for the coroner to arrive. The mood among the team grew somber. Tom's death was a stark reminder of the dangers of the wilderness, but the fear etched on his face hinted at something more sinister. As we pressed on, we came across more evidence of the group's desperate struggle. Rachel's backpack was found near a riverbank, soaked and torn. There were deep scratches on the surrounding trees, as if someone or something had been clawing at them. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. We found Emily next. Her body was partially submerged in the river, caught on a fallen tree. The water had made it difficult to determine the cause of death immediately, but the look of horror on her face mirrored Tom's. The river's current had washed away any footprints or other evidence, leaving us with more questions than answers. Jake and Sarah were discovered together, not far from Emily. They were huddled together in a makeshift shelter, as if trying to protect themselves from some unseen threat. Their faces, too, were twisted in fear. It was becoming clear that they hadn't simply gotten lost. Something had hunted them. The deeper we went into the forest, the more oppressive it became. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the air grew colder. My team was on edge, and I could feel the weight of their unease. We were no longer just searching for missing hikers. We were unraveling a mystery that defied explanation. It was Rachel's voice that led us to her, faint and weak, calling out from somewhere deeper in the woods. We followed the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests. When we found her, she was barely conscious, leaning against a tree. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and her eyes were wide with fear. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We thought it was a joke, but they're real." She passed out before she could say anything more. We airlifted her to the nearest hospital, hoping she would survive and tell us what had happened. But even with Rachel found, there was still no sign of Ben. We continued our search, but the forest seemed to swallow our efforts. Every step we took seemed to lead us further into a labyrinth of trees and shadows. As night fell, we set up camp again, the weight of our findings pressing heavily on us. That night, as I sat by the campfire, I thought about Rachel's words. Who or what were they? And why had they hunted the hikers? My thoughts were interrupted by a rustling in the bushes. I turned, my flashlight piercing the darkness, but saw nothing. The night was eerily silent, save for the crackling of the fire. At dawn, we pressed on. We were exhausted, both physically and mentally, but we couldn't give up. Not yet. As we neared the end of our search area, we finally found Ben. He was alive, but barely. He was curled up in a small cave, his body trembling uncontrollably. His eyes were wide with fear, and he kept muttering the same words over and over. "They're still out there. They're watching." We airlifted Ben out as well, and with him, the last of the missing hikers had been accounted for. But the mystery was far from solved. Back at the hospital, Rachel and Ben were kept under observation. Both were in severe shock, and it took days before either of them could speak coherently. When Rachel finally awoke, her story was chilling. They had encountered strange figures in the woods, silent, shadowy beings that seemed to appear and disappear at will. At first, the group had dismissed it as a prank or a trick of the light. But as the days went on, the sightings became more frequent and the figures more menacing. They had tried to escape, but the forest seemed to conspire against them, leading them deeper into danger. Ben's account was similar. He spoke of being chased, of hearing whispers in the darkness, and of a relentless feeling of being watched. Whatever they had encountered, it wasn't human, or at least not entirely. The official report listed the deaths as accidental, caused by the harsh conditions and the hikers' disorientation. But I knew there was more to it. The fear in their eyes, the strange marks on the trees, and the elusive figures Rachel and Ben described all pointed to something beyond our understanding. As I closed the case file, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of a deeper, darker mystery. The Appalachian Trail had claimed many lives over the years, but this was different. This was something ancient, something that lurked in the shadows waiting for its next victims. I still think about that case, especially when I hear about other hikers going missing in those woods. I can't help but wonder if they are still out there, watching and waiting. The forest holds its secrets close, and sometimes it's better not to know what's hiding in the darkness. The media quickly got hold of the story, sensationalizing it with headlines about ghostly apparitions and cursed trails. It didn't take long for conspiracy theories to flourish. Some speculated that the hikers had stumbled upon an old unmarked burial ground. Others believed it was the work of a secretive cult. None of these theories provided any real answers, though, and only served to muddy the waters. Back at the station, I couldn't let it go. There were too many loose ends, too many questions that gnawed at me. I decided to dig deeper. I reached out to local historians, folklore experts, and even some of the more eccentric individuals who claimed to have knowledge about the area's darker past. Most of what I got were tall tales and superstitions, but one name kept coming up: the Watchers. According to legend, The Watchers were ancient beings tied to the land, guardians of the forest who became vengeful when their domain was disturbed. Supposedly, they could bend reality, making it impossible for their victims to find their way out once they were marked. I was skeptical, of course, but there was something about the consistency of these stories that I couldn't ignore. I visited the families of the victims, hoping to find any overlooked details. Sarah's mother showed me her daughter's last text message. "It's so beautiful here, but feels like we're being watched. See you soon." Jake's sister handed over his journal, filled with sketches of eerie figures lurking among the trees. Each account added another layer of unease. The breakthrough came when I visited an old library in a nearby town. Buried in the archives was a series of reports from the late 1800s, detailing similar disappearances in the same area. The descriptions were chillingly similar: hikers vanishing without a trace, those found alive speaking of shadowy figures, and an overwhelming sense of dread. One report mentioned a lone survivor who claimed to have escaped by offering a personal belonging as a token to appease the Watchers. Armed with this new information, I decided to return to the trail one last time. I needed to see for myself if there was any truth to these old stories. I brought along a small team, including a local guide who was familiar with the legends. As we ventured back into the forest, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, as if the woods themselves were closing in around us. We reached the area where the hikers had last been seen. The forest was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. We set up camp and waited. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it, a faint whispering, just beyond the edge of the light. The guide's face went pale and he muttered something in a language I didn't understand. He pulled out a small charm from his pocket and threw it into the darkness. The whispering stopped. The next morning we found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark of a tree were strange symbols, similar to those in Jake's journal. Nearby, we found a small pile of personal items, watches, jewelry, and a compass, all arranged in a deliberate pattern. It was as if someone had left offerings, just like in the old reports. We decided to leave the forest, our nerves frayed and our minds reeling. Back at the station, I pieced together my findings. While I couldn't prove the existence of the Watchers, the evidence was too compelling to ignore. The official cause of death remained unchanged, but I filed a supplemental report detailing the strange occurrences and the possible connection to the local legends. Months went by, and life slowly returned to normal. But the case never truly left me. Occasionally, I would hear about another missing hiker, and my thoughts would return to those haunted woods. I kept in touch with Rachel and Ben, who were slowly recovering from their ordeal. They still had nightmares, but they were determined to move on with their lives. One evening, as I was closing up the station, a package arrived for me. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbols we had found in the forest. There was no note, no return address, just the box and its unsettling carvings. I placed it on my desk, feeling a chill run down my spine. I still don't know what happened to those hikers. Maybe it was just the harsh reality of the wilderness. Maybe it was something more. But one thing is certain, the forest holds its secrets, and some things are better left undiscovered. The days turned into years, but the memory of that case never faded. Occasionally, I'd find myself driving by the edge of the forest, staring into the dense trees, wondering what really happened out there. The legends of the Watchers became a quiet obsession, a puzzle that I couldn't solve but couldn't let go. I wasn't the only one affected. Other hikers and adventurers reported strange sightings and eerie experiences in that part of the Appalachian Trail. Some claimed to see ghostly figures, while others spoke of feeling an unshakable sense of dread. The local authorities eventually closed off that section of the trail, citing safety concerns, but the stories persisted. Ben and Rachel tried to rebuild their lives, but the trauma lingered. They moved away from the area, hoping to escape the shadow of the forest. Despite their efforts, the nightmares followed them. I kept in touch, offering what support I could, but I knew that some wounds never fully heal. As for me, I continued my work, taking on new cases and helping those in need. But the mystery of the missing hikers remained a haunting presence in my mind. Every so often, I'd pull out the old case files, reading through my notes and the eerie accounts from that fateful search. The carved wooden box still sat on my desk, a silent reminder of the unknown. One winter night, a storm rolled in, blanketing the town in snow. The power went out, casting the station in darkness. I lit a candle, the flickering flame casting long shadows on the walls. As I sat there, the silence was broken by a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find an elderly man, his face lined with age and wisdom. He introduced himself as John, a retired ranger who had once patrolled the Appalachian Trail. He had heard about the case and wanted to share his own experiences. Over a cup of coffee, John recounted his years in the forest. He spoke of unexplained disappearances, strange lights in the sky, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. He had his own theories about the Watchers, believing them to be ancient guardians of the land, beings who demanded respect and offerings from those who ventured into their domain. John's stories were both fascinating and terrifying, adding new layers to the mystery. He believed that the hikers had unknowingly trespassed on sacred ground, awakening the wrath of the Watchers. His advice was simple but profound. Respect the forest and its secrets, and it might let you leave in peace. As the storm raged outside, I thanked John for his insights. His visit left me with a sense of closure, but also a deeper understanding of the forces at play. The forest was a place of beauty and danger, a realm where the past and present intertwined in ways we couldn't fully comprehend. In the years that followed, I retired from the force, passing the torch to younger detectives eager to make their mark. I moved to a quiet town far from the Appalachian Trail, but the case remained with me. It was a story I would tell my grandchildren, a cautionary tale about the mysteries of the world and the importance of respecting the unknown. One summer, I returned to the forest, not as a detective, but as a humble traveler seeking closure. I brought the wooden box with me, intending to leave it as an offering. As I walked the familiar paths, I felt the presence of the Watchers, silent and observing. I reached the spot where we had found the carvings and placed the box on the ground, whispering a prayer for the lost hikers. The forest was quiet, but I felt a sense of peace. I had done all I could to understand the mystery, to honor the memories of those who had perished. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft rustling behind me. Glancing back, I saw nothing but the dense trees and the play of light and shadow. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of acceptance. The forest would always hold its secrets, and I would respect that. The Watchers had allowed me to leave, perhaps recognizing my intent. As I walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, knowing that I had finally made my peace with the unknown.